Just a reminder that in a few minutes we'll be joining Jim Fitzpatrick in Belfast for the Northern Ireland Leaders Debate, with voters putting their questions about the key issues to Northern Ireland's leading politicians. So don't go away. Right now, though, it's time for a look at the weather. Here's Susan Powell.
Hello. There's plenty of cloud across the UK at the moment, and during the course of Tuesday it did suppress the temperatures for many of us. We only got into the mid-teens at best. Next few days, can't promise you all the cloud will clear, but it does look like things will become warmer as we switch into a more southwesterly Atlantic airstream. It's a northwesterly though that takes us through the night. We're pushing to weakening weather fronts south across the UK. There'll be some sporadic rain, nothing particularly intense or heavy. Under the cloud, a very mild night in some areas, temperatures staying in double figures. Through the course of the day on Wednesday, these fronts will gradually drift away eastwards, this high helping to push them through and weakening them all the while. First thing, quite gloomy, I think quite dank. There will be some outbreaks of rain around, but it should start to brighten from the west as the day goes on. In the east and across the Midlands, however, through the afternoon where we do see the sun coming out, we are likely to start to develop some sharper showers, perhaps with hail and thunder. Temperatures, however, up on Tuesday up to 17 degrees across eastern England. And then for Thursday, the high to the southwest starts to push itself further across the UK, curtailing any fronts really making their way southwards and pulling us in to that southwesterly Atlantic airstream. So warmer air coming in across the board. Despite cloud and some outbreaks of rain across Scotland and Northern Ireland, our temperatures will lift up on those from earlier in the week. We could see up to 17 degrees in Aberdeen, perhaps just 14 in Glasgow. Greater chance of more persistent rain here. I think, though, dry for England and Wales under the high, temperatures 20 or 21 degrees. A front does have more success sinking its way south on Friday. Some wetter weather for northern England, for Wales, perhaps the Midlands, and the rain will again cap the temperatures somewhat, perhaps 15, 16 degrees. Here, further south, they're up to 20 degrees again. Behind the front, some sunshine, and in the sunshine it should feel pretty pleasant, a little fresher, highs of 15 or 16 degrees. As for the weekend, it's the high at the moment that looks like it's coming to dominate yet again. So a lot of fine weather promised for the weekend, and we'll stay in that milder air. So with a little bit more in the way of sunshine, I think temperatures creeping up further.
Less than 36 hours before the polls open in Northern Ireland's Assembly election, the leaders of the 5 main parties face questions from a studio audience here in Belfast. Welcome to the Leaders' Debate. Good evening. 90 seats at Stormont are up for grabs, and the leaders of the parties expected to take the lion's share of those seats are with us tonight. It's an election that could have profound implications on the direction of politics in Northern Ireland and even across the UK. A big welcome to all of our viewers on BBC One Northern Ireland and the BBC News channel. Over the next hour, our politicians will face questions from our audience, made up of grassroots, party supporters and some undecided voters. We're not quite yet at pre-COVID capacity, but it's great to have an audience here. And if you have a stake in this election, I hope tonight's debate can help you make your choices on Thursday. The leaders with us tonight are Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, less than a year into the top job with the Democratic Unionist Party. Will his party retain the top spot at Stormont for Unionists? Or will that shift to Sinn Féin, the pro-Irish Unity Party, represented tonight by its Vice President and Stormont leader, Michelle O'Neill? The Northern Ireland system asks parties to designate unionist, nationalist or other. Alliance is in the other category, and its leader, Naomi Long, has seen her party doing well in the opinion polls. How will that translate into votes and seats? The leader of the Nationalist, Social Democratic and Labour Party, Colm Eastwood, is here to argue his case. He improved his position at the last Westminster election. And completing the lineup tonight is also Unionist leader Doug Beattie, who has been reshaping his party's message and is also less than a year into the leadership role. Ladies and gentlemen, your panel for this evening. Now, if you want to join the discussion on social media, it's hashtag #BBCNIDebate. Let's have our first question, and it comes tonight from Joe Hutchinson. Joe is from Coleraine, and he works in hospitality. Joe.
Well, all the party leaders commit right now that if they are elected, they will turn up on day one and form an executive, and if they don't, well, they refuse to pay.
Jeffrey Donaldson, will you turn up for work, form an executive, and if not, will you refuse your pay?
Well, I've never shirked a day's work in all of my political career. I will be there on day one to meet the other parties, to discuss or begin discussions about a programme for government, about setting a 3-year budget. But I'm also clear, and we're being honest with the electorate about this. We believe that the political institutions must be sustainable. And that means we've got to deal with the big issues that are in front of us, and not least the harm that the Northern Ireland Protocol is doing to undermine political stability in Northern Ireland, to undermine economic stability. It's changed our constitutional status, and we can't ignore that. And if we're going to have a sustainable executive, it must be one that has cross-community support, where consensus is the way that we move forward, and there isn't unionist support for the protocol. So this issue needs to be dealt with. OK, so you're saying that issue needs to be dealt with, and therefore you're not forming an executive, but you'll still take your pay. I mean, what about you personally? You're an MP at Westminster. You haven't resigned your Westminster seat. Who's going to be paying you? Is it going to be Westminster or Stormont? Can you guarantee the audience here tonight, Joe, who asked the question, that you will be taking your seat at Stormont? Well, I wouldn't be standing as a candidate leading my party into this election if it wasn't my intention to lead my party into the Assembly. Your intention doesn't quite sound like a guarantee that you will take your seat. Will you take your seat? Unlike you, I don't take the electorate for granted. I will fight for every vote. No, I'm asking if you win your seat at the Assembly, will you take that seat? Of course. I am committed to leading the DUP into an executive, but we must deal with the issues that are in front of us. We must deal with the protocol. We've got to get political stability back in Northern Ireland. We have to have an executive formed on the basis that can command cross-community support. And right now, there is not unionist support for the protocol. Okay. It is harming our politics in Northern Ireland. It is undermining our economy. It is damaging the political institutions, and we need to deal with those things. OK, let's stick to Joe's question here, Naomi Law. Will you be turning up, forming an executive, and if not, will you be taking your pay?
Well, I will be there on day one, ready to enter an executive if the electorate give me the mandate to do so. And I think it would be obscene at a time when the real issues that are facing people are the cost of living crisis, the pressures in our health service, the challenges that we have around climate change and all of the other things that face us. If we were to continue to take salaries during a period when we weren't doing our jobs, I think it's really important that those of us who are willing to turn up and willing to get on with the job are able to do that and be paid for that job. It's right that we should, but we should not be locked out as we have been in the past for long periods, and that's why we want to see reform of the institutions so that we can actually have sustainable government here. There are lots of issues that need to be dealt with, but I certainly don't want the embarrassment, frankly, of being an Assembly member again during suspension while people are struggling to heat their homes and feed their families, and I'm being paid for less than the full job that I was elected to do.
Doug Beattie, you haven't, so far as I know, committed to definitely being part of that executive. Will you be joining in opposition? What do you say to Joe's question about taking pay if there isn't a functioning government?
Well, I think Joe raises a fundamental question that we all have to answer at some stage. And that is, I think we will all turn up on the Monday morning and we will all look to go into the executive if we have enough seats to be able to go into that executive. But what's really important for us is, where is that executive taking us? What is that programme of government going to be? Where are we going to be in 5 years or 10 years' time? If we're all being asked to jump into an executive before we even know the direction of travel of that executive, then we all go into something that could just give us the same as what we've had for the last 5 years, stale government. So what we've always advocated for is that we organise quickly, we have really deep discussions about a programme for government, get that programme for government agreed before we run the hunt, before we have ministers, and then we can form an executive.
I should just say that the hunt is the procedure by which ministerial positions are allocated between the parties.
But it's an important point, and I'll tell you why it's an important point, because right now we all rush into nominating who's going to be the Minister for Health, who's going to be the Minister for Infrastructure, who's going to be in education, and then they go in there and they go into a silo mentality. But if you agree the programme for government first, its outcomes, what the budget's going to be, how we're going to pool and share that budget, if you agree that first before you put ministers in place, then we have a programme for government that we're all signed up to. And I think that's an important way for us to travel in this next government.
Michelle O'Neill, it's not just the DUP that have stepped down from the executive in the past. They, of course, Paul Givan, the First Minister, resigned in February 2022. But your party, Sinn Féin, pulled down the executive in 2017, and it was out of business for 3 years when the cost in salaries was £15 million. Are you going to let that happen again?
I think it's absolutely unfathomable that actually we'd be sitting here tonight in front of the electorate and telling them that there's not going to be a government on the other side of this election. This is a democratic process that we're all engaged in. And I listened to Jeffrey speak about, what he wants to do in executive, or even Doug in terms of negotiating a programme for government. And those things are all important, and let's have those conversations. But what I still don't hear tonight, even in these first few minutes of this conversation, is that if they're going to accept the democratic outcome of the election. I think that's what the public want to hear. I've been on the doors, we all have, and we've all engaged in the public for a considerable period of time now, and the things that the public want us to respond to is trying to put money in their pockets to help them deal with the cost of living crisis. It's about trying to invest in our health service. So all the plans in the world won't deliver that unless you're actually going to accept the democratic outcome.
But you stayed out of government over issues like Irish language. It wasn't cost of living then, it was the Irish Language Act. Well, the DUP not equally entitled to choose the protocol as their issue on which to negotiate?
But I think the DUP are dishonest with the public because they're holding us all to ransom. They're holding our politics to ransom, and they're holding our public to ransom. Whilst the rest of us want to put money into people's pockets and deal with the cost of living crisis, the DUP are telling people that their identity is under threat when that is not a question whatsoever.
It's not what we're telling the people of Northern Ireland, Michelle.
And if you let me finish the point, Jeffrey, and then sure, come back to me. But what you're telling the electorate is that you won't accept the democratic outcome of the election. And I want us to make politics work. I want everybody to make politics work.
You're shaking your head, yeah.
Well, that's not what I've said. And, whilst Michelle says she'll be there on day one, the last time round, she wasn't there until day 1044.
Jeffrey,
3
as you know,
years
you were in Westminster
after she walked away from the Department of Health. She was Minister of Health at the time. And in those 3 years, the waiting list grew and grew and grew. And now we have to clear up the mess that was left behind.
But if leaving government is such a bad thing, why did you do it?
But from day one, Naomi Long will be the Minister of Justice. Robin Swan will be the Minister of Health. They continue in their posts. This idea that we go back to a stormont where there are no ministers in place is simply not true.
They're caretaker ministers. They're caretaker ministers.
Okay, well, let me bring in
ministers, and they're still able to take decisions. Conor Murphy recently took a decision to allocate £400 million to the health service without executive approval. That proves that decisions can be taken by these ministers.
Jeffrey Donaldson,
let's
bring in Colm Eastwood. It seems as if it doesn't matter if you pull people out of the executive. But anyway, answer Joe's question perhaps first.
There's no budget. There's no budget for next year, so we can talk all we want tonight about all the issues. No, there isn't. There's no budget agreed for next year. The reality is we can talk about the cost of living and we can talk about health.
And we will talk about some of those issues, I think.
Just to get this out of the way first, nothing will be done about any of these issues if we don't have a government. And Jeffrey, again today, is refusing to say whether he will form one because he wants a deal between the British government and the European Commission. Well, that's up to them. We can talk to them, we can negotiate with them, but we can't stop government here just because that hasn't been done yet.
You may not want to be part of I am part of the discussion. You may not want to be part of the debate about our future in terms of this protocol and the way in which...
Well, I know who was part of the debate the last time, and I know why we're in this situation.
In the way, Colin, in which we have laws imposed upon us in Northern Ireland over which we have no say. I want to be elected by the people of Northern Ireland to make their laws, not have them imposed upon us by Brussels. So let's change that. Let's get lawmaking back at Stormont where it really belongs.
Good idea.
That's what I want to achieve. That's what the DUP is out to achieve. That's why we want your support.
International agreements are not under the auspices of the Assembly or the Executive. That's for Westminster. That's the job you had when you had 10 DUP MPs, when you had the ear of the Conservative government and you had to deal with them. And what did you deliver but the mess that we're in now that you're complaining about? So, I mean, if you want to do the job and if you want to tell those of us who are still in ministerial positions to get on with the job, do your job and actually step up and say you're willing to form a government.
Well, Naomi, we are doing our job. We are at Westminster fighting the case for Northern Ireland, whilst others don't bother to take their seats, turn up and make the case for Northern Ireland. And we will continue to do that. But let's be clear, I don't agree with Naomi Long. She says, leave it to Westminster to sort this out.
No,
I say
that's not
that
what
the people of Northern Ireland...
Let me bring the audience...
I said the Assembly can't do it.
Let me bring the audience...
Let
me bring the audience in. Jeffrey Donaldson, let me bring the audience in. And I think just in the back row there, the woman with her hand up, please.
Yeah, it just seems that Jeffrey seems to be showboating to other people. You know, if you want to show up for the electorate, show up. It's not an issue. If you're gonna take your seats and go in and form a government, say that you're gonna do it instead of turning around and saying we're going to solve the protocol. It's an issue that if you're going to stand in an election and you're going to form a government, say yes here tonight that you're going to do it, instead of leaving everyone here in limbo, not knowing what's going to happen come Friday.
OK, I'll come back to you in a minute. And, gentleman in the third row here. Yes, please, sir.
Yeah, I'm from a border community. You know, the protocol is crucial for us. It's a compromise. There are over 40 million vehicle moves across this border annually. And it is an absolute fact that the protocol issues will be resolved between the UK government and the EU Commission. The Assembly has no input whatsoever.
Yep.
And that actually isn't true. The Assembly does have an input, and that's written into the protocol itself. It's inadequate, but this is an opportunity for the people of Northern Ireland to have their say.
Just explain to them clearly why not going into government helps you renegotiate the protocol.
Because it sends a very... Because I went into the Executive back at the beginning of 2020 on the basis of an agreement that all of these parties signed up to called New Decade, New Approach. And in that agreement, it stated clearly that the UK government was committed to protecting Northern Ireland's place within the UK internal market. The UK government failed to deliver that. And I am entitled to say the agreement has been breached.
But why
until that agreement is honoured by the government, I think I'm entitled to say the basis on which I entered the Executive has not been met, and I'm entitled to say to the government that they need to resolve this. They can do it.
OK, and just to go back to the original question then, until that is resolved, you will take your pay but not enter government.
No. I am saying that we will, of course, continue to do our job. We will represent the people who elect us. We are seeking a mandate.
You can't do your job out of the Executive.
It's not as if I am stepping back and saying one thing. I have made clear that we want to see the protocol issue resolved quickly because it is undermining political stability in Northern Ireland. And I understand the points that are being made. But if we had a situation where one side agreed something and the other side didn't, that's not consensus. The unionist community do not agree.
We want to get in, then I'll come to you, Michelle. Quickly.
Well, Jeffrey said quite a lot there. The reality is Jeffrey's waiting on Boris Johnson to ride over the hill and save him. Ask everybody else who ever trusted Boris Johnson in his life how that ended up. Jeffrey wants to make this election about the union. This election is not about the colour of people's passports in their pockets. It's about us needing to get round the table and get money into their pockets because they're starving, they can't turn their heating on. That's the real issue that are faced. And you must be hearing it, Jeffrey. You must be hearing the same thing that I'm hearing on the doors. And they don't care about protocols or positions at Stormont. They want money in their pockets because they're really struggling out there.
That is simply not true.
It is true, Jeffrey.
And I'm sorry, but it's not. I am talking to many people, and for them, they are concerned.
The people at those rallies you're going to, Jeffrey, might be concerned, but ordinary people are not concerned.
The protocol is driving up. The protocol is driving up.
Let me go back to OK, Michelle O'Neill, then I want to go back to the audience.
It's driving up the cost of living, Jim. But it is increasing the cost of food in Northern Ireland. It is increasing the cost of
Jeffrey Donaldson, if you're going to
heating
quote statistics, tell us where they're from.
Yeah.
I can certainly tell you where they are from. They come from the monthly survey that takes place of goods in Northern Ireland and the comparison between those goods and the cost of goods in
but does that break out what costs are due to the protocol or what costs are due to Brexit or what costs are due to Northern Ireland being a different part of the UK?
We know, for example, that the cost of bringing goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland in the first year of the protocol has increased by 27%. Those figures came from the hauliers in Northern Ireland, not from me, and those costs are passed on to the consumer.
Michelle O'Neill,
and it drives up the cost of...
Jeffrey, let someone else get a chance. Those back-of-the-envelope calculations don't wash it. No. They don't wash it with the public at all. But Jeffrey made a point about consensus politics, and I think that's an important conversation. I believe in partnership working, and I believe in working with others. But when Jeffrey refers to consensus politics, he means on his terms. And that is not where we are today, and that's not where we're going to be again in the future.
We're going to have to call time on this question. No, come back maybe long later, but we will run out of time if we spend all of the time on our first question. So let's get on to our second question, and it comes from Maxwell Smith, a teacher from Belfast. Maxwell.
Hello. Do you want there to be a border poll after this election?
Michelle O'Neill. And I should just say for some viewers, just to explain, a border poll is a referendum on Irish unity.
Yeah, I mean, I've always made the case that we have the outworking of the Good Friday Agreement, and that we should have the public should have their say in a border poll or a unity referendum. And that conversation is already underway, and I think Brexit has been a real catalyst for that conversation. And a lot of more people are entering into that conversation, but it needs to be a healthy debate. And we need to have the conversations around what that would look like into the future. So when I say the election's about change, it's about the future, it's about how we can plan for a better future for all of us together.
OK, well, just be a bit more specific there, because I think what he's saying is, do you want a border poll after this election? So when do you want your border poll?
Well, I've said we're in the decade of opportunity, so I believe in the next decade we'll be having that conversation.
But do you want a date for it? Because you took out ads, or friends of Sinn Féin took out ads in the US newspapers, the New York Times, the Washington Post, where you called in the Taoiseach to set a timetable to plan, prepare, to advocate. So could you be a bit more specific? When do you want the border poll?
And Maxwell, my response to that is that I want to have it whenever it is the right time. I'm not fixated on a date, but I'm very fixated on the planning, because Brexit's a good case in point around how not to do a referendum. So whenever it comes the time where everybody will have their say, so let's make that also very, very clear. It'll only be the people here that will ever decide a constitutional change. And that's a good thing for us all to get engaged in terms of the conversation. But what I am saying in terms of this election, it's about the things that we have mentioned in the first few minutes of this debate. It's about the cost of living. It's about what the executive can do in terms of that.
Explain, maybe some people might be scratching their heads. Why are you here as a leader of Sinn Féin being coy about a date for a border poll? Surely that is your raison d'etre.
Yes, I don't think it's any surprise to Maxwell or to anybody else, just in terms of my position, in terms of the unification of this country and the fact that we can do better. But what I am saying in terms of this debate around this election campaign, it's about cost of living, it's about health. I'm on the doors, that's what people are telling me. It's about what this executive can do. So
you're not going to use any increased mandate as a reason to call for a border poll?
I have been calling for Citizens' Assembly to plan for change for some time. That will continue, and this conversation that's already started will continue regardless of the outcome of the election. OK, Doug Beattie, do you want to see a border poll after this election?
There's not going to be one. Look, Michelle is the leader of a Republican Party. Of course she wants a united Ireland. I'm a proud, confident unionist. Of course I want a united kingdom. That's the given. That's always been the case. The DUP's been in government with Sinn Féin for the last 15 years. And trust me now, the Republicans didn't suddenly this year all of a sudden want to have reunification. They've always wanted it, and they've always shared government. But it's not there yet. It's not even anywhere close. And if you look at the elections in 2019, we had the very same scare tactics. If you don't vote for us, there's going to be a border poll. It's what's used to drive people through fear to the polling booth. And we need to get rid of it. There is no border poll on this ballot. And after the election, regardless who's the largest party and who's not the largest party, Republicans will still want a united Ireland, Unionists will still want a united kingdom. But what we have to do is try and advocate for the people here in Northern Ireland on the here and now. And we're right to say that the cost of living is not a tagline. It is not a strapline. It is a lived experience. And we have to deal with that. There's no border poll. No border poll.
So just to clarify again, you don't want to see one?
Of course I don't. Of course, because I'm a unionist. I'm a proud unionist. So why would I?
Just to be clear. Jeffrey Donaldson, there was one time, though, I think, when someone in your party, even a former leader, Elaine Forrester, said, bring it on. Perhaps it's time to have a border poll to clear this mess up, as she put it. Do you want to see one now?
No, I don't. And I believe that a border poll would be divisive. And I certainly don't think that we should be focusing on that. I think that we do need to be focusing on the issues that really matter to people.
Talking about it,
and, you know, Doug says that he wants a United Kingdom, as do I, but I don't think Doug recognises the threat that the protocol presents to the Union. The Court of Appeal has stated recently that the protocol alters Article 6 of the Acts of Union, which protect our right to trade freely within our own country.
The question was about the border poll. So just to be clear,
that makes me a second-class citizen in my own country, and that is something I am not prepared to accept. So, you know, Sinn Féin say that they're not really that interested in a border poll.
That's not
Yet
correct.
it is at the heart of their manifesto. They are demanding a date. And you know, a few weeks ago they were in Washington and New York. The Washington Post, the New York Times, they paid thousands of pounds for big adverts saying Irish unity in our time. Anyone who seriously thinks that if Sinn Féin win this election, they won't use that as a mandate to push for their border poll is deluded. Of course they will. And I have every right as a unionist to say that is not the way forward. We need to focus on the cost of living crisis. We need to focus on fixing our health service. We need to focus on growing our economy, not on a divisive border poll.
But why is a border poll divisive, or any more divisive perhaps than, say, a Brexit poll?
Well, Brexit was called by the United Kingdom government. There was a referendum. We had a debate and a decision was taken.
And the majority of people here voted against it.
But you supported Brexit. You must have known it would be divisive. Whatever way people think about Brexit, it was divisive.
When a referendum is on a yes-no debate, it's always divisive, Jim.
But you wanted to have that debate. Why would you not say that Michelle O'Neill can have her border poll debate?
Because I think that it will lead to instability in Northern Ireland. It will not fix the problems that matter to ordinary people. And I think that we need to get on with resolving the issues that are in front of us, and that does mean addressing the issues related to the protocol.
OK, let me bring Naomi Long.
Your
your party, of course, famously sometimes accused of sitting on the fence on these big issues. So are you going to come off it tonight and answer this question? Would you like to see a border poll after this election?
Well, we're not sitting on the fence. We're tackling the issues that are actually up for debate in the Assembly. And we've spent most of the debate so far discussing issues over which the Assembly has no control whatsoever, rather than talking about the issues that the Assembly actually can influence and change. So we can change things like how we tackle the cost of living crisis. We can deal with our health service.
And those are all very good issues, but not the subject of the question. Do you want to see a border poll?
We can't call a border poll. We can't set the date for it, and we can't influence it.
Well, we're not
going to be asking for a border poll, because what we want to do, as I said, when Jeffrey talked about suspending government until he got his way in the protocol, we're not going to talk about suspending government. We are going to talk about doing government, because we believe that's in the best interest of the people of Northern Ireland.
So you're not going to be the Minister of Justice after next Thursday?
Well, to be very clear, Jeffrey,
are you suspended?
Let's not take.
But don't mislead the public, Naomi.
Let's not take anything. Let us not take anything for granted.
I don't.
Because there's no guarantee who will be the Minister of anything after the election. So let's let the public have their say on that. I'm there in a caretaker capacity at the moment, and I will continue in that caretaker capacity until another minister is put in place. But that is not government. That is individual ministers in a caretaker capacity in their departments. Government is about collective action, and we can't deal with the health service and the cost of living crisis when we're in silos and we can't meet together and make key decisions about the budget. And it is true, Jeffrey,
let me
doing the job.
Let me bring Colm Eastwood in. I think we did hear you say that you're not going to call for a border poll. Colm Eastwood, will you be calling for one?
No, I will not. People know my view on United Ireland. I think it's pretty clear. We will plan for it. We're preparing for it now. But that's not today's issue. That's an issue for another day. Today's issue is the fact that we don't even have a government or a guarantee of a government or anybody who's going to step in and deal with the crisis. And we shouldn't get away from this. The crisis that people are going through right now, every single day in their own homes, and I think they are frankly sick of this. I mean, the only person that's focused on a border poll in this election is Jeffrey Donaldson. I mean, what's it about? It's the same old story. Sinn Féin are going to be First Ministers. We should all be afraid. There's going to be a border poll. We should all be afraid. Well, maybe we should actually realise that the choice in this election is the choice that we always have in this place, is that we sit down together as neighbours, work together and sort out the problems that are facing people. The conversation about the future of this island...
the protocol, Colin, because
you
keep avoiding that. You know you don't. You're not listening to what unionists are saying. Unionists are saying this protocol is harming our place in the United Kingdom. It is harming our economy. It is undermining political stability. And I hear nothing from you, Colin.
Well, let the other unionists on the panel...
Leave it to the EU.
Let the other unionists on the panel tell us what he thinks unionists are saying on the protocol, since it keeps coming up there.
Well, let's be absolutely clear here, because we need honesty with the people here, and we have been honest since Brexit. We said it would be destabilising, and we were right. We talked about the protocol; it would be destabilising. It shouldn't be there, and we were right. And other people had a chance to block it, and they didn't.
And we did.
You didn't.
And we did. Yes.
Well, what we've got? Well, if you blocked it, it wouldn't be here.
Well,
if you blocked it, we wouldn't be talking about it.
called the general election and he won the election. And that's democracy.
I look at your 5-point plan. I look at your 5-point plan. Remove the Northern Ireland Protocol. And the first bullet underneath it, the protocol must be replaced. Is it remove it or is it replace it? Well, because we're the only ones who have said that there's an issue with the protocol where it's feast or famine. We need to have something that works for absolutely everybody. And we haven't done that. So not remove it then, because it says remove it here.
Yeah, remove it and replace it, Doug.
Can some of the rest of us have a go? Like, the reality is, Jeffrey isn't accepting the fact that every action has a consequence. Jeffrey backed Brexit. People before Profit backed Brexit. Nigel Farage backed Brexit. It's a funny group of people who got together to back Brexit to the detriment of people in Northern Ireland. Then we had an opportunity to have the softest possible Brexit. Jeffrey voted against it. Then we had the protocol. Jeffrey, yes, he did vote against it, but your actions have led to the protocol. Now we're just trying to deal with...
So the people of the United Kingdom didn't vote for Brexit.
I'm going to finish the sentence. We're now trying to deal with the chaos that has been created by your Brexit, by the Brexit that has been enforced on the people of Northern Ireland. And actually, do you know what? The protocol is a pretty good opportunity for us to create jobs in Northern Ireland if we'd only embrace it. But you want to keep claiming defeat instead of victory. I think we need to sit down again. We'll talk about these issues if you want, Jeffrey, but walking out of government, staying out of government is not going to solve one single issue that you have with the protocol.
OK, let me bring in the audience here. And, yeah, gentlemen, just there. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'd just like to challenge the assertion that the border poll makes unionists second-class citizens. I actually think it's quite ridiculous that unionists are claiming to be second-class citizens, given the history of Northern Ireland as a country. My point here is that we've heard tonight from other audience members that people on the border need the protocol. And I will say, yes, there are problems in terms of trade and customs across the border, across the Irish Sea. But what we need to do is streamline the checks across the Irish Sea so that goods can travel freely between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, but also keep the border on the island non-existent as it is, as laid out in the Good Friday Agreement.
OK. Anybody got a different view on the border poll or want to come in? Gentleman there. Yes. You, sir. Yep. Thank you.
Yep. How can any self-respecting Northern Ireland politician not oppose the protocol when it has, since the beginning of 2021, imposed on Northern Ireland a status which meets the United Nations definition of a non-self-governing territory, a colony, that involves laws in 300 areas being wrested from Northern Ireland to another polity in which Northern Ireland has no representation? How can any politician sit back and let that happen without their inaction clearly communicating the fact that they've fallen asleep at the wheel?
OK, let me get another comment in from the audience. Yes, sir.
On the issue of borders, it wasn't a Sinn Féin agriculture minister or an SDLP agriculture minister that built the border in the Irish Sea, that built the border in the United Kingdom. It was a DUP minister who spent a year administering the border there. Why did the DUP give those who want a border poll a leg up by dividing our country?
Well, I'm happy to answer that question. Actually, the fact is it was the UK department called DEFRA who put the infrastructure in place because the Agriculture Minister in Northern Ireland refused to do so and ordered his officials not to do it. That that infrastructure, and it is temporary. We have refused to put in place any permanent infrastructure at any of the ports in Northern Ireland linked to the protocol. The temporary infrastructure that is there was put in place by DEFRA, the English department, over the heads of the Department of Agriculture in Northern Ireland. And as you know, there's a court case at the moment because there's a challenge to the direction that was given by the Agriculture Minister for all checks to stop.
OK,
So we had a number of political stunts from the DUP to give a pretence that they were not bringing in the infrastructure that was required, whenever in fact they had to bring it in legally, and they were instructed to do so by a British government minister, I might add. But let me say this, we wouldn't have a protocol to discuss tonight if we didn't have Brexit. The hardest possible Brexit, which you can take a lot of responsibility for delivering with all the other partners. But what we need to do now is find ways to make the smooth implementation of the protocol, to make it work, to bring that certainty and stability that our business community really desire. We need to have that, otherwise people can't plan for the future. So let's find ways to make the protocol work, to iron out any of the kinks that are there. That's what the rest of us want. Okay. We sought to find mitigation against Brexit, and a number of the parties here worked together, and we achieved the protocol. And I'm glad we achieved the protocol. Now let's make it work.
All right. Well, let me just pause that there. We'll move on to our next question. Maybe the protocol will come up again. Seems to be a favourite. So our next question is from Fiona Doran from Belfast, who works in the legal department of a bank. Fiona.
Good evening. We're in 2022, one of the wealthiest countries in the Western world. Yet the cost of living crisis has gone beyond heat or eat for working class people. Many people can't afford either. So what is your party pledged to do to tackle this urgent issue specifically?
Specifically, Colm Eastwood.
Thanks, Fiona, and you're absolutely right. I mean, what's going on in communities across the north right now is scandalous. The number of food banks that people are going to. People who are going out to work all day long are then having to go to a food bank, then having to decide whether they can turn their heating on. I think it's scandalous. And then we see that BP, for example, are making billions and billions of pounds in profit. It is immoral. And I think we need to do something about it. So there's £300 million in a Stormont bank account that can't be spent, of course, because, again, I say it again, the DUP walked out of government. Well, we would put £200 in everybody's pocket. We'd put £500 in people's pockets here on benefits. We'd extend the free school meals programme to make sure the kids can get fed a hot meal at home. We'd give 30 hours free childcare to people who are trying to get out to work. None of that's going to be enough. I think the British government need to do a windfall tax on those companies like BP who are taking us all for a ride, in my view. And then we need to cap their profits. There's lots of things that need to be done.
So you've mentioned things which are obviously Westminster's domain, but in terms of what will happen at Stormont, do you believe those measures are costed? The £200, the £100, the childcare?
Yes, it comes to about 230 million. There's another 100 million in the pot, and we can do other things. I mean, I think we should look at making free school meals universal. I know there's a campaign for that. We need to get serious about this. The reality is, though, and we can talk about it all night, we can write big, long manifestos, we won't be able to do one single thing if we don't have a government next week. That's what's at stake. And if we don't have a government, the next outcome is that Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg and the rest of them will be running Northern Ireland, and they don't care about working class people in Northern Ireland or anywhere else.
Doug Beattie, what are you going to do about it?
Well, the situation is dire. It's gone well beyond politicians just sitting here and saying we have a problem. There are people out there who are really suffering, and I mean genuinely suffering, and we can't sit here and do nothing. And we have to hold people to account. That £300 million could have been used. It wouldn't have got us through everything. It would have been a very short-term measure, but it could have been used to help people most in need. And we didn't use it. Even if we'd put the executive up for a day just to pass that legislation, to get that out there, we could have done something, but we didn't. And that's a real failing. And people need to own that failing, that we didn't have an executive to be able to spend that money. So it's sitting there, sitting in a bank account, while people are cold and while people are hungry. And people will die cold and they will die hungry. We've been calling for a fuel poverty task force since November last year. Andy Allen has been doing that. And we really need to focus on that so we can find out where the problems are and start identifying it. And we also need to have the warm home discount scheme, which they have in England, which is £150 a year to the most vulnerable households. And that needs to be put in place. But we have to use other levers here, and we have to get in to start lobbying Westminster, because the 5% VAT on home heating oil can be taken away tomorrow by the UK government. And they need to do exactly that. And nobody can say to me, well, they can't because of the protocol. Other countries within the EU are doing exactly that. The UK government could do exactly that.
Okay.
And the cost of, and if I can, Jim, sorry, the cost of food that is really causing the issue here is because the cost of fuel going into the vehicles that's transporting that food, that's why food is rising. So we need to get the price of fuel down for those essential users, such as hauliers. If we can lower that down, then what they're transporting, the cost of that will lower also.
OK, Michelle O'Neill, we've heard a number of policies here. Your party also has ones about immediately spending that $300 million. But have you anything else more, more ambitious in terms of raising money to deal with these long-term problems?
There are long-term problems, but there are immediate problems, and the cost of living that Fiona referred to is obviously the thing that's pressing most on people. And it isn't just, the more vulnerable in society, it's actually people who are out, the two people maybe in the house, working all day, coming home and still not being able to make their bills. And I think that is the struggle that we face. But there are things...
But yeah, you talk about working people. For instance, Northern Ireland has 25% of the workforce is in the public sector. Now, that's something Stormont has power over. What are you going to do about public sector workers' wages? We're talking nurses, we're talking policemen, civil servants. Are they going to get an inflation equal pay increase? Because that would mean a pay increase of 9%.
Yeah, so and let me come back to that. But I think just to answer Fiona's point around what we would do, because I think it's important to put that out there.
Is that something you would do?
I will come back to that, sure. But I think in terms of being able to deal with the cost of living crisis in the here and now, £230 into every household is what we're proposing, and that's fully costed in terms of what Conor Murphy put forward as the Finance Minister. But that's only one thing alongside all the other energy fuel support schemes that we've also brought forward. But Doug's absolutely right. There's a lot of these things that are not within the gift of the Assembly. They're the powers that still lie in Westminster. And I can assure you there's nobody in the Tory party who's sitting worrying at night over how they're going to heat their home or put food on their table. And they have failed to act in the way...
But have you thought about something like public sector pay?
Yes, we're going to have all those conversations, because just before...
But you haven't a policy on it yet?
No, we will, because we'll have peer review bodies who'll make recommendations, and we'll have to take all of that on board. But there's no doubt, if you look at the staff in the health service who have went above and beyond, been absolutely amazing throughout this pandemic, and across a number of other public services. If we're going to look after those people who actually look after us, then we must invest in them. They're the public service asset, if you like. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there.
Jeffrey Donaldson, you're getting some flack here for this $300 million that's sitting there that apparently can't be spent. So this is the consequence of withdrawing from government.
Well, we don't accept the money can't be spent. Conor Murphy has recently allocated an additional £400 million to the health service without an executive being in place. So we don't agree that it is impossible to do this. And indeed, we're the only party. We're the only party who, on the 14th of March, writing to all of my colleagues around this table, put forward firm proposals to spend that £300 million.
Not true.
But, as Doug said, well, there's the email, Naomi.
Well, you definitely sent the email, but you're not the only party that had a plan. We've been talking about this for months.
Doug said, and he's right, that at the heart of this is the increase in the cost of food. So let me quote you the figures, Jim, that I mentioned earlier, because I think this is important. As a direct result of the increased cost in bringing food products from Great Britain to Northern Ireland due to the protocol, consumers in Northern Ireland are paying on average 4% more per item than they are in Great Britain at the moment. And when you look at dairy products, that rises to 8%. And when you look at chilled convenience goods, it rises to 19% more for those products than they are paying in Great Britain. That's the protocol. That's why it needs to be sorted out, because it is driving up the cost of living
so people
in
can check.
Ireland.
And I don't have those statistics in front of me, but just so people can check them, what's the source of those statistics?
The source of that is the Kantar GB panel average price tracker and the Kantar Northern Ireland
just to be
panel
clear, does the Kantar
tracker.
survey say it's directly related to the protocol?
Yes, it demonstrates that the additional costs are linked to the increase in transporting...
just to be clear, if you're quoting it, can you be clear that it says that it's directly related to the protocol?
I am clear that the additional...
Because I'm not aware of Kantar doing a survey on the protocol.
I am clear, Jim, I am clear. We'll go and check it out if you wish, but I am clear that the additional cost... what is the difference between the cost of food in Great Britain and the cost of food in Northern Ireland?
It's the
extra customs checks that we have to pay for. It's the delays in transporting goods because of those customs checks. It's the additional paperwork. It's the additional staff that have to be employed. And it's the additional transport costs as a result of the protocol. It is driving up the cost of living in Northern Ireland.
I really hope somebody is doing a kind of fact check on some of what we're hearing this evening, because it's outrageous. First of all, Jeffrey did send an email I can confirm that. He is not the only party that has come forward with proposals around the cost of living crisis. That is false. In fact, all of the parties brought forward proposals on the cost of living crisis, but the reality was we couldn't implement them because Jeffrey withdrew their First Minister, so we didn't have an executive to take new or novel cross-cutting decisions. And that's the law. Now, Jeffrey might feel that he can simply stand like King Canute in front of the courts and deny that it exists, but that isn't how the law works. We have taken advice as ministers as to how far we can make decisions.
How come Conor Murphy was able to allocate 400 million pounds to the health service?
You've had quite a lot of time, Jeffrey. I would like to make my point, if that's okay. You are able to allocate additional funding to things you're already doing, but you cannot do new things, novel things.
So what about the energy payment support?
Jeffrey Dawson, let Fiona Long finish. And just to return to the core of the question.
Yes, and when it comes to issues around cost of living, they have to be cross-cutting, because there is no one department that holds all of the answers to this. So for a start, the UK government needs to step in. There needs to be a windfall tax when it comes to the extortionate profits that some energy companies are making. That needs to be dealt with. There's also been the issue of increasing national insurance contributions. I think that should be reversed. I think that was a poor decision in terms of timing. In terms of what the executive can do in our plans, we believe a home heating voucher scheme would go a long way to helping people actually be able to keep warm. We have proposed a child payment of £20 per week per child for those children who are below school age in the most need on the homes in most need. We've also proposed the free school meal should be extended, and the longer term project. The thing that I think is really important is we're proposing, for example, retrofitting homes with insulation so that we can actually make people's homes warmer and reduce their energy bills long term. We've talked about investment in renewables.
That's a good list. I don't know if we can get...
Investment in renewables so that we have secure energy, because much of what is pushing up the cost of energy and the cost of food is the fact that we have a war going on in Ukraine, and that is impacting
Let me get back to the audience here and just see what other ideas people have in the audience. Just at the front row here, yes.
We hear Jeffrey Donaldson is managing to make poverty into a green and orange issue. Does he accept that this is why people have lost interest in politics and is why people have lost faith in the Stormont executive? Because he's managed to take the cost of living crisis and make it green and orange.
OK, let me bring in others. Thanks for that. Let me see, where have we got anybody else want to come in? Yes, just at the very back row there. Yes, sir.
I think what so much of this conversation tonight has demonstrated is the need to reform the institutions, because as long as one party can hold everyone else to ransom, we won't solve any of these issues, whether it's Jeffrey on the protocol or anyone else on any other issue. We need to recognise the need for reform of the institutions.
OK, well, you're being accused of holding everybody else to ransom, Jeffrey Donaldson.
I'm certainly not doing that. And this isn't an orange or green issue. And in fact, our proposals to support working families in Northern Ireland is for everyone. The cost of living affects everyone. The harm this protocol is doing to Northern Ireland affects everyone, regardless of your political perspective. That's why, instead of burying our heads in the sand and pretending there isn't a problem, let's deal with the problem immediately so that we can have sustainable political institutions and move Northern Ireland forward together. That's what we want. That is what we want.
Anybody in the audience, just let me clear this up. Anybody in the audience agree with Jeffrey Donaldson's points on this? A lot of people are quizzing him on this. Anybody wanted to offer him some support in this one? Yes, sir.
It is incontrovertibly true that the protocol is contributing towards the cost of living crisis. You can't
said
separate the two things.
True, but have you got the statistics? Because
I think there's a debate about the extent to which it is, but I think it is incontrovertibly true that it is contributing towards it. Economists can debate about the extent to which it is an issue, but it certainly isn't helping, and it is contributing towards a crisis that we're facing at the moment.
OK. Thanks very much
for that.
So
it's contributing, Jim. It's contributing. Yes. And absolutely it's contributing. Yeah. But so is war in Ukraine. So is Brexit. So are a whole multitude of other things are all contributing to it. What you can't do, though, is stick yourself in the corner, stick your fingers in your ears and ignore it. You need to get together. We need to stand together, sit together and come up with ways to fix the problem. And that's not what's happening.
OK, I will have to call time on it there because, once again, we've ended up talking about the protocol when I think the question was originally about the cost of living. But thank you for your question, Fiona. Now, our next question is from Lou Rooney, who's from Downpatrick and works in marketing. Lou.
Thank you. How would the party leaders implement their plans for the health service when the government appear to be privatising the NHS by stealth?
Doug Beattie, your party held the health portfolio over the last couple of years. What would you do?
Well, first of all, I've got to say this, that we have held it. We took it when everybody else sidestepped it, and we said we would take it, and we did take it. And Robin Swan stepped in there. And Robin Swan has been an absolutely exceptional health minister in the most difficult times you can imagine, to deal with an underfunded health service, a poorly resourced health service, and then also deal with COVID.
He's ended his tenure so far on record waiting lists, 354,756 waiting for a first appointment, around 1 in 4 waiting in some shape or form here in Northern Ireland, worse than anywhere else.
No, and you're absolutely right, and that's what we're saying. We are underinvested in our health service, and we reduce beds. When you reduce beds, you reduce staff, and there's one of the biggest problems that we've got, and that is we need to stabilise the workforce. I was talking to a nurse just the other day in Lurgan, and she's only been a nurse for 7 months, and she's getting something like £13-14 an hour, and she's working with an agency worker who's on £50 an hour doing the same job, and it doesn't make sense. So we have to stabilise the workforce. That's the first thing that we have to do.
On issues like that, and perhaps we have to recognise, of course, we did have the pandemic over the last couple of years, but none of the big decisions have been taken in that period. None of the big reforms that perhaps will help with the structural problems that are clearly there.
No, they absolutely have, because Robin has published an elective care plan and has costed, which is £700 million for 5 years, and he's put that in place. And what that means is when we get the funding, when we get the resourcing, when we get the multi-year budget, that means that we will have a 7-day-a-week service. So what you get on a Tuesday in surgery is what you will get on a Sunday. And people may have to travel a little bit further, but they may get seen in a more timely manner. So he has put these things in place, but he hasn't got the money to be able to do it all just yet. So it's there, the plan's there. He's worked hard to do it, but without a multi-year budget, it's really hard to put this thing anywhere forward.
And again, I should just explain that because of the various problems at the Assembly, there isn't a 3-year budget, and that seems to be having a particular impact on things like health. Colm Eastwood, specifically, what do you think you would do? And you've talked before, I think, about the need to take these hard choices. Doug Beattie talks about, perhaps you might have to travel a bit further, but you'll get better service, etc. That all sounds good, but when it comes to closing a hospital in somebody's constituency, it never happens.
Yeah, but because we're not talking about closing hospitals, and I think that's been the problem in this conversation. We say to communities, we're going to take this off you, and we don't tell them what we're going to put in place. We need to use the health estate that already exists and use it better. I don't mind travelling a bit further to get an operation that I've been waiting for 5 years, if I can be guaranteed that I'm getting it. I think we all love the NHS. We particularly love the people who work in it. We need to pay them properly, all of them. But we also need to be able to get access to it. It's no good saying it's free if people are going to the credit union to borrow money to go private to get fairly simple operations that they've been waiting for 5 or 6 years. I know so many people in that situation. It's absolutely wrong, but it takes courage from political leaders. We're prepared to come together with other political leaders and do that. We also think we need to put a permanent secretary in charge of transformation themselves. There's lots of things that they need to do, but we need to show commitment from the very top of the civil service and from the political establishment as well. I'm also very concerned, given the pandemic that we've just been through, and it is right that Robin did a fantastic job there, but we are now faced with a pandemic of mental health that we need to deal with. One of the things that we think needs to happen there is a junior minister for mental health needs to be appointed to show that we as politicians are committed to dealing with this crisis, and it is a crisis. It's getting worse every single day. We're committed to that, and the only way we'll do it, I'm going to keep saying this, is have a government next week.
Naomi Long.
Well, I mean, look, I think it's really crucial that we get started at the first opportunity to start the reform of the health service, because I think what Doug and Colm have already said is really important. We have no time to waste. People are languishing on waiting lists, some of the longest waiting lists in Western Europe. People are dying on waiting lists and are not being seen. And what we essentially have in many parts of the health service is a reduction down to a red flag and a blue light service, where people who have chronic illness don't get treated at all, and where people are seeing a notional health service rather than a national one. It will take difficult decisions, and that's why, irrespective of which of us at this table takes on the health ministry in the next mandate, I am pledged to supporting them in making those difficult decisions, because it is in my interests and in your interests as members of the public that we get the health service right.
People have been saying that for years. We're willing to take the difficult decisions, but they've never done it.
They haven't been doing it, and I am saying we will do it, and you can hold us to account if we don't. I understand I live in Belfast, and people make presumptions that when we talk about having to travel a little bit further, we mean come to Belfast. Well, to be clear, I'm happy to travel a bit further if it means I go to Altnagelvin to get my operation instead of getting it in my local hospital. I'm happy to do that if it means I can have that done in a timely way and that other people can access the services they need. We're all going to have to make that stretch in terms of what we do. And then we need to invest actually in our transport infrastructure so people can access local services. Because there's no point talking about going a little further to a town that maybe a village that only gets a bus once a week. So we've got to get those things right. We've got to get the structure right within the health service. It isn't just about waiting lists either. It's about primary care. It's about investing in our GPs. It's about investing in our pharmacies. And it's about investing in things like social prescribing that aren't necessarily more expensive, but can be much better in terms of outcomes for mental and physical well-being.
The question identifies perhaps an increasing privatisation, but the last time waiting lists were cleared in Northern Ireland, it was through using private services to get that backlog done. So do you think there is a role for the private sector?
Well, I don't see it as, if you like, a long-term role, but I understand why people go and use the private sector as an extra resource at times of crisis. And the private sector, in fairness, stepped up when it came to COVID and provided additional resources so that we were able to manage that in a timely way. I think the key, if we're going to use private sector to deal with waiting lists, is that at the same time, we need to be dealing with the underlying structural problems within the health service so that when we stop investing in that way in waiting lists, they don't simply go straight back up again. Okay. And I do think that there's a key point here, Jim. You know, we send patients, for example, around the UK to get operations done. Why do we not bring the consultants here and do the surgery here where they could see more than one patient at a time and actually deal with it locally? We have the space to do that. And I know that's something that Robin has been working on. Let
Michelle O'Neill come in on this question. So again, just to return to the core question, you know, how do you stop creeping privatisation if that's what it is? The question from Lou seems to think the government appear to be privatising the NHS by stealth. But what would you do to make the difference?
And I wouldn't disagree with Lou's assessment that is, in fact, the intent of the Tories. But we have to fight for our health service. We have to fight for the NHS. We wouldn't have got through the last 2 years without those people that actually went over and above to get us through the pandemic years. But what we now need to do is fix what's wrong. And we all know what's wrong. A lady died in the streets of Newry waiting for an ambulance to come. That's not to discredit the ambulance service. It's because the system is broken and it must be fixed now. Others can say that it's a priority, but you actually have to back that up then by supporting the budget, which is to give that £1 billion extra. But people have to understand what that's for, and it's for a reason. It's to deal with the waiting list backlog. Over 400,000 people.
And will that involve the private sector, just to be clear?
So part of Robin's elective care plan, which is basically how you do scheduled operations without them being interrupted by emergency care, is actually looking at temporarily using some of that, but we should not. That's not our solution. Our solution is investing in our health service, investing in our staff, a workforce plan, safe staffing levels, a recruitment and retention strategy. These are all the things that actually are the components that will bring together a better health system. There is dire chronic need for this extra £1 billion in health, and that's why we've prioritised it.
You were a health minister before. Would your party take the role again?
Well, obviously, we're asking for the biggest possible support we can get in this election, and then the more votes we have, the more seats we have, the more departments we have a choice of. And obviously, health will be in the mix.
In the mix, it's rarely been the first choice. I think that's fair to say.
We need to humanise this. Because what we're doing is sometimes we're throwing out far too many stats. We're throwing out what we aspirationally want to do, and we have to absolutely humanise this. And everybody has a story to tell about the NHS and how it's done them fantastic work for them, or how it hasn't because of the system. Tomorrow's the anniversary of the death of my 18-month-old grandson, who died on a waiting list. So that's the human side of this. People are dying on waiting lists, and we can't squabble about this anymore. We can't just talk about this because it helps us get elected or get a vote. We have to do this now to service the people out there, because our people are dying on waiting lists, and we need to humanise it every time that happens. And I think Michelle's telling us about what happened in Newry actually does that also.
Jeffrey Donaldson?
Well, humanising it means putting the additional investment in, which will deliver an extra £1 billion will deliver 750,000 additional procedures in our health service, which will drive down waiting lists, and we're committed to that. We've outlined that in our plans to fix the NHS. But it also means recruiting more staff into the NHS. The courageous people...
Does it also mean, as Colm Eastwood has repeatedly said, going back into government?
It absolutely means going back into the
It means recruiting more staff into the NHS. We can do that now. We need more GPs so that there's access to primary care. I'm sure many of my colleagues, I certainly have heard out on the doorsteps from people who can't get access to their GP, and it's important that we have more GPs. We need to train and recruit more GPs. We're committed to that. Let me give you an example, and I think this is important. And a mention has been made of the privatisation or use of, for example, agency staff. As a result of an FOI request that we did, we discovered that for one agency, one nursing agency alone, over one weekend, the cost of providing the nurses that they offered that weekend was £78,000. And over 1 year, that amount accumulated could result in an additional 450 more nurses being employed in our health service. That's the cost of using agencies. It's a massive cost. And we can't... Well, Michelle, with all due respect, you abandoned the Department of Health for 3 years and left it rudderless. Without a minister, you walked away from the Department of Health. You walked away and left people languishing on waiting lists.
Just to be clear then, if you're saying that you're saying the DUP won't be staying out of government for 3 years, that's a bad thing.
We're saying that we will sit down with our colleagues, agree a programme for government, and that must include fixing the NHS, recruiting more staff, investing more in the health service, and helping people to get the treatment they need when they need it. And that includes access to our GPs.
We need to nail this. Nice warm words. The reality is Jeffrey hasn't been clear. If the protocol still exists next week in its current form, will you sit down with the rest of us and talk about forming a government to deal with the waiting list and to deal with all the other things we've talked about?
I will be there on day one. I will talk and negotiate about setting a programme for government, and we need to do that. And we need to agree the 3-year budget before we form the executive. And yes, we do need to deal with the protocol, because the protocol, as I've said, is driving up the cost of living. It is harming our economy. It is undermining political stability in Northern Ireland.
Is the protocol
we need to address these issues and get them resolved, because we need stable, sustainable political institutions in Northern Ireland.
We still haven't had an answer. We still haven't had an answer as to whether or not the protocol is going to be a block to forming a government.
And that, I think, will
really...
You won't have time to answer it. That's the problem.
I have made that very clear. We need to deal with the protocol.
We'll have to leave it there, I'm
afraid
we are out of time. Thank you very much indeed. And that's where we have to leave the leaders' debate. You can find a full list of candidates standing in Thursday's Assembly election by visiting bbc.co.uk/newsni. Now, some of the other parties, that's the TUV, the Traditional Unionist Voice, the Green Party and People Before Profit, will be having their say in a specially extended BBC Newsline on BBC One NI at 10:30 and later on the BBC News Channel. And tomorrow morning, Good Morning Ulster and The Nolan Show will have reaction across BBC Radio Ulster. So thanks again to all of our party leaders, to Naomi Long, to Jeffrey Donaldson, to Michelle O'Neill, Doug Beattie and to Colm Eastwood. And indeed, thanks to our audience here in Belfast and at home for watching. In 48 hours, the polling stations will close and the decisions will be made. I hope we've helped, and a very good night. Thank you.
Download the BBC News app now and get the latest headlines as they happen. Personalise your app to learn more about the stories you care about and watch BBC News live wherever you are. Stay up to date, whatever you're up to. Download the BBC News app.
Tonight at 10, the Prime Minister says there is more the government can do to help with the rising cost of living, but he rules out a windfall tax on energy companies. BP has announced a sharp rise in profits for the first 3 months of this year. They've doubled since last year. But as their profits rise, so too do prices and energy bills for millions of people, piling the pressure on the government to do more to help.
I'm not going to pretend that every family is going to have a magic solution from the government overnight. I simply can't pretend that we can do that, but we can be as ingenious and as compassionate as possible.
Also on the programme tonight, rescued at last after more than 60 days trapped underground in Ukraine. More than 100 civilians, including children, who've been living for weeks in desperate conditions beneath a steelworks in the besieged city of Mariupol, finally reached safety. Protests in the United States after a leaked document suggests the Supreme Court is about to overturn a law protecting the right to abortion. A race to the polls as people across the UK prepare to vote in local elections on Thursday. A special report from Northern Ireland where the results could bring seismic change.
And coming up in the News Channel, after 2 years out of the Premier League, Bournemouth are back following a 1-0 win over Nottingham Forest.
Good evening from Belfast. The Prime Minister has hinted he may be prepared to do more to address the rising cost of living, but he has dismissed fresh calls from opposition parties for a windfall tax on energy companies. Boris Johnson says the government will use what he called the ingenuity and compassion shown during the COVID pandemic to try to help people cope with rising costs, but he warned there was no magic solution. It comes as BP announced it made almost £5 billion in underlying profits for the first quarter of the year, more than double the figure for the same period last year. Rising prices and energy bills are expected to be a big issue in the elections across the UK this week, including here.